if a medical school rejects you because of that, then you don't want to go to that medical school.
The folks who are watching live may already know, because we had posted ahead of time, that Dr. Ryan Gray is taking a couple days vacation.
Yep.
But it will still have our dean. The title of the show is Ask the Dean, and our dean in residence.
That's right.
Dr. Scott Wright is still here. And I'm here. I know some stuff too.
Of course, you do indeed. You do indeed.
So we're definitely still hoping to have a good session and answer as many of your questions as we can.
Yep.
And I'll take a look here. And looks like we've got our first question. Let me see if it can post. All right. So we've always got a few questions that can't post because otherwise they wouldn't be anonymous. So I'll just read this one. Question says, would working as an autopsy assistant classify as clinical hours? Asking for a friend.
Asking for a friend.
Uh-huh.
So I don't think so. I think that in that case, the patient is not living.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think clinical really emphasizes the notion that you are participating with a physician in a setting where you experience patients and families or whatever. And so I think that would definitely be a healthcare environment, sort of, but I would say not on clinical. That would be my first thought about that.
Yep.
I mean, it sounds fascinating if you could stomach it.
Yeah, and especially if you're thinking that that's the line of work you'd like to get into.
Right.
But agreed. Usually when we're talking about clinical, we're talking about interacting with patients.
Right.
And there's not a lot of interaction.
Well, hopefully not. If there is, there's something definitely wrong.
Yeah. If there is, let's get that patient out of the morgue and back upstairs.
Right. Exactly.
It's a good question, though. I definitely understand why that would be asked. Yeah. All right. Let's see as other questions come in. So somebody asks, does paramedic school count as an extracurricular? It was 2,500 hours of training.
Extracurricular. Well, it's certainly extracurricular to your college environment. So yes.
Sure.
I would say that in that way it's extracurricular. Yeah. Now within itself, it's curricular, in terms of what they're doing at the paramedic school. Mm-hmm. But relative to your pre-med pathway, yeah, I think it's not. It would be considered extracurricular. Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Well, it looks like questions are a little slow today. So while we're waiting for a few more to come in, what I'd love to hear from you is we're coming to the end of the 2020 MCAT season, and something that's been announced is that there'll be a sample MCAT exam available for free in late October, but no word on 2021 MCAT yet. And this comes up almost every week. I think we talked about it last week, but any guesses, any insights into what the 2021 MCAT and application process is going to look like?
To me, it all depends on what happens with COVID.
Yep.
It depends on when a vaccine comes up, and I don't see anything changing until that happens. So, if kind of what we've been led to believe is perhaps in the spring there'll be a vaccine. If that's the case, it's going to take a while for that vaccine to be manufactured and to get it to the public. So I don't know. It's going to be tight in my view. And So, you never can guess kind of what AAMC is going to do with the MCAT, but in terms of the application cycle, I just wonder if a lot of medical schools are seeing that this virtual interviewing, for example, has worked out pretty well. They may stick with it or give it as an option. So, we'll see. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's a good point, right? I mean, I think a lot of people are starting to think ahead to next year, but a lot of this year still needs to unfold.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right.
All right, we've got a question we can post. So this is a longish one. A student asks, do admissions, I think they meet admissions committees, do they ever get to the point in an application where they say, quote, this student has too many W's, F's, end quote, and decide they're not a fit for their school? Or can a really strong upward trend help the student's case? For example, a really bad first 2 years undergrad and then a really strong finish.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about this a lot about trajectory and the trend, and so I definitely think that the scenario that the student creates, the example, is a really good one. That it's not unusual for students to have a bad freshman year or even a bad first 2 years, and then recover and do really well in the last 2 years. Now, so I think in that case, no, an admissions committee doesn't just automatically wipe it off and say, no, we're not going to deal with this student. They're really going to look closely at the trend. And I think the MCAT becomes very important for a student in that circumstance where they want to see what's the real story here. And obviously, when you get to the last 2 years in college, you're dealing with upper level coursework, particularly in the sciences, where the material is much more difficult. And so I would definitely say that, yes, admissions committees look very carefully at all that. And I would say no, that they don't ever get to the point where they say, well, this student has too many F's, particularly if they're in the early years. Now, I would like to say a couple of words about W's, and these are what we call withdrawals or dropping a class. Anything that shows up on your transcript as a withdrawal or a drop. And what medical schools do get concerned about when it comes to withdrawals or drops is that if this is a trend, so if, in other words, if every semester there's a drop or two, and what it says to them is that a student signs up for a bunch of classes and then they withdraw or they drop from a class or two, and if this is a trend, then that becomes very concerning. They begin to question, what does this mean in terms of the student? Is the student not able to fulfill what they needed to do or wanted to do? Are they, what's happening with all these withdrawals? And particularly if there's semester after semester, if there's one withdrawal or two over the course of your entire undergraduate career, then that's not a problem. But if it's every semester or there's just, once a year, there's these drops or withdrawals, then that can be very concerning to an admissions committee. So be careful about signing up for courses that you are not, don't overload yourself. And I think sometimes students do this trying to game it, and they say, well, I'm going to sign up for 18 hours or 20 hours or whatever, and then I'm going to see which classes I like and which professors I really get involved with and all that, and then I can drop, a class or two that semester. And that's not a wise thing to do, because it does show up on your transcript, and it can be a real red flag to an admissions committee if you do that consistently.
Yep. Yeah, it definitely gets back to a theme I've heard you speak about over and over, which is part of why there's such a weight towards the undergrad GPA. Is it's not just about the standard curriculum. It's about showing the ability to work over a long, sustained period of time.
That's right.
Not can you crunch it out for one semester or 4 semesters, but for several years, can you do hard work and maintain a pretty consistent level of result?
Yeah, Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with that completely. Cool.
All right. So follow-up question specific to your Texas expertise.
Woohoo.
Student asks, for Texan applicants, is it futile to apply to out-of-state schools, assuming they don't have strong ties in other states?
No. My understanding of this question is that the student is a Texan and that they are considering applying to schools outside of Texas.
I think so.
And no, I don't think so. I think you have to be careful with which schools you're applying to and know what their residency requirements are for their state if it's a public school. And some private schools have also have some restrictions on students from their own state. But no, I don't. I do not think it's futile. And I think a smart student would, if you're a Texan, a smart student would apply to every school in Texas, and then would identify a handful of schools outside of Texas that they're interested in, and if they are interested in schools outside of Texas, and then apply to those as well. And now there are some students in Texas who will only apply to Texas schools, which is also fine. We have a lot of medical schools in Texas. They are very much, the restriction by the state is 90% Texas residents in these schools. And so it really benefits Texans quite a bit. So, but I definitely think for a Texas applicant to apply outside the state is not futile. So the answer to the question is no.
Okay. Yeah, and I think it gets at sort of a bigger question that we've covered a few times before, which is applying out of state. The general rule of thumb, there are some variations by school, by state, but mostly if you're applying out of state, you should be looking at private schools. Because although what we just described with Texas is a little bit more, like that rule's a little bit more extreme, all state schools or nearly all state schools are sort of funded in a way that they need to take some in-state applicants.
Yes, absolutely. That the majority of their class has to be in-state residents.
Right.
Correct. Yes.
All right. Exactly. Let's see. Next question.
Got some more coming in.
Will AdCom's question if an applicant is more suited towards a different field, like policy or law, for example, if they list a lot of activities unrelated to medicine, but that they're passionate about?
No. I think that the medical schools, the admissions committees like to see broadness in their applicants and interests that are outside of medicine. Whether that's, you're playing the drums in a band, or you're, as you say here in this question, like policy and law, for example, which can fit very well with medicine. There are programs that have MD-JD, schools that have MD-JD programs. So I think the key here is if you're passionate about it, then involve yourself in it. And even if it's not related to medicine or doesn't have an obvious connection to medicine, admissions committees are not going to sort of hyper question that. Now, it could come up in an interview, where an interviewer might say, "Hey, tell me a little bit about your interest in, policy and law or whatever. And I see that you've done a lot of stuff in that area. Let's talk a little bit about that." But in and of itself, I don't think that is an automatic red flag for medical schools. No.
Right. Now, if your personal statement is all about policy and law,
then that could be that could be a problem. Exactly. Exactly.
I don't want to be a doctor. I want to be a lawyer. My parents are making me do this. Please don't take me.
Yeah. I've seen, you laugh. We laugh
you have
about that,
right?
Yes, I've had personal statements that basically said something very similar to that. Yes.
Just one time out of the many, many thousands.
Correct. That's correct.
All right. Next one. Is it a bad idea to get a letter of rec now from professors if you graduated in May? I fear if I wait until the spring, they won't be able to speak as well about my presence in the classroom activities.
So this is a good question. And this is really a question about timing and about and about contact with the faculty that you're getting letters from. So first of all, I think if you graduated in May and you're doing a gap year, you keep in touch with that professor throughout the year. You email them, hey, this is what is going on with me. Or if you have access to being able to go by their office, if you're still in the community or whatever, even a phone call could be, a good idea. But definitely emails to just keep them up to date with whatever's going on with you, I think is a really good idea. I don't like the idea of a letter being too far in advance. I always say that the letter should have the date on the letter should be the same year as the year you're applying. So if you're applying in the 2020, if you're applying in 2021 for the 2022 application year, then I think you have to have a letter that has on that the date of the same year. Otherwise, it can look a little quirky when you're applying in 2021 and the letter's dated 2020
Right.
or something like that. So I think it's best just to wait, keep in touch with them, and let them know what's going on with you. When you get when you get within a month or so of wanting to ask them for a letter of recommendation, send them your personal statement, send them a resume, just to update them, relative to what you're doing. And they're not going to forget you if you keep in touch with them. They're not going to forget.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think the root of this question, which is, I'm afraid they're going to kind of lose pulse on me, is absolutely right. It's just that rather than asking early, we're suggesting help them keep pulse on you.
Yes. Absolutely.
This is like such a tiny detail, but I've seen so many students get burned, so I'll share it. As someone who's advised a lot of premeds, but also as someone who's written a lot of letters of recommendation, a lot of, especially if you do like school committee letters, they get really like stickler about obviously hand signed signatures.
Yes.
Like I e-sign all the time, and I've had letters rejected for that.
Yep.
So my friendly tip that I'm adding on to Dr. Scott's very good advice is when you're sending the resume or the CV or your LinkedIn profile or whatever updates you're sending, include a note that tells them, by the way, can you please print this and sign this by hand?
Yeah.
Blue ink is great. Then there's no question.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. It's a big deal. And I know at TMDSAS in Texas, we required there to be a handwritten signature. And if it didn't come with one, it would get rejected, and we would put it back on the applicant. But also, TMDSAS, we would contact the recommender too and say, hey, we need this, to be hand signed, and we would walk them through it. There are some particularly older faculty who are not as well versed in technology, and we would see this often with dentists who are writing a dental letter for a pre-dental student. Mm-hmm. And they would have no clue. And we would actually have to get on the phone with them and say, go to your desktop. Do you see? And occasionally they would say, what do you mean when you say desktop? You talking about my desk, or what are you talking about? And so, and we would be all, bless their hearts, but yeah, sign the signature, definitely. And I agree with you, encouraging the faculty to recognize that that's important is good.
Yeah. And it's funny, like I said, it was a small detail, and yet we've just gotten a follow-up question. Somebody says it adds so much extra overhead. Why? Do you know why that's important?
It's all about verifying authenticity. And it is, you would be surprised to know that there are forged letters every year. Students forge letters. It's not typical, but it's also not rare. And so that is important. And that's one way where a medical school or these application services can know, this is an authentic letter. We've had in the past students who went to such a such a degree is they created a letterhead for a clinic and wrote a letter. And when we tried to verify it, we discovered that clinic doesn't exist. It's a complete fabrication. So it's really, it's unfortunate that we have to go to that level, but that is, and like I said, this is not something that happens a lot, thank goodness, but it does occur.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a real shame when we're talking about a career where ethics are paramount. That's a bummer. But it also then kind of speaks to why people are checking. And obviously, all systems have loopholes and workarounds. That's part of why you also include contact info, because
yes, that's
it's not too hard to Google a professor and then call them.
Now I do see the day, hopefully in not too long, where the application services will figure out a way to do this in a way that doesn't provide such a great degree of effort, both for the student and for the recommender.
Somebody just commented, it sounds like they're punishing everyone for a few people who are going to try to figure out a way to cheat. Well, they actually wrote but I'm sure you guys who are listening and watching understand that this isn't a map thing, right? It's a central application service thing.
Right.
And some of their systems are still a little paper-based. So as Scott just said, with time, some of that might come up to speed with electronics and security, and that would be great. But in the meantime, it's what it is.
And to that question, to that comment from one of the viewers, the comment is you're punishing everyone for the few people who are going to figure out a way to cheat anyway. That's what laws are all about. That's what speeding laws are about. That's what every law we have in any society is based on, the fact that not everybody's going to do it, but a few people are, but we have to have laws to, so that's a little philosophical off topic, but just wanted to say, I agree. But that's the whole system of rules that we have in modern society is based on the fact that some people are going to do it anyway.
Well, while we're talking about society, let's dig into this topic. Okay, our student says, I also just started as a clinic escort at Planned Parenthood. Is this too controversial to be placing on my application? I am very passionate about reproductive rights. As you might guess, I've got a lot of thoughts here, but I want to hear yours, Scott.
Yeah. No, I don't think it's too controversial. I think you have to be you. When you're filling out your application, you have to be you. And if you're passionate about reproductive rights and you are passionate about what you're doing at Planned Parenthood, then you put it on there. And I will say to you that if a medical school rejects you because of that, then you don't want to go to that medical school. So you be you, you put what you're passionate about on your application, and you talk about it in a way that makes sense and is straightforward. And I would say it would be a tragedy if you did hesitate putting it on there, because this is all about you and who you are. And if you're passionate about that, you go for it. That would be my feeling.
100% agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. You got to do you. And that's a great experience that you're getting.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Don't short yourself the chance to tell them about everything you're going to learn.
Oh,
make sure you're taking notes. That's what the reflection box and mapped is for.
That's right.
Come home from those sessions and write down what happened. Obviously HIPAA compliant, but reflect on what you learned and saw.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. Here's a really specific one. So I don't know how much you're going to dig into it, but it gets at the heart of some good questions. Student says, could you speak to what UT Southwestern AdComs really focus in on for their candidates?
Well, I think that every school has its own mission, and Southwestern does, as every medical school does, have a sense of what their mission is and what they're looking for, what they know about applicants that have been successful in their curriculum. And so they're looking for a profile of students that they feel like are going to be successful at their school. They're going to be looking for students who add diversity to the class. So there's a lot of goals that, in the admissions process of what they're trying to do. I prefer not to, speak specifically about one particular school because I think that it's probably not appropriate at this setting, but I definitely think that every school has a sense of what they're looking for. And they really focus in on, this is where secondary applications are very important because it really tells the school a lot about specific things they're wanting to know about. That's why they have a secondary application that is beyond just the primary, which is general for everyone. So I think that, you look carefully at the secondary application questions that are asked, and you can get a kind of a good idea of sort of what they're looking, analyze the questions. What do you think that question is about? Some schools have small, very limited secondaries. Some schools have no secondaries, but some schools have a pretty extensive number of questions on their secondary applications. And so really analyze what those questions are. And I think you can get a better idea of what they're really wanting to know or what they're looking for.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It seems like a lot of students see secondaries as like a hurdle to jump. And it is, but it's also in the same way that an interview is a two-way street, the secondaries are. It's telling you a lot about what they're looking for.
Yeah.
If you're looking at UC Riverside, you're going to probably see a question about serving people right in the Inland Empire because that's their stuff. So if you don't like the idea of living in Southern California, but 2 hours from the beach, UCR may not be for you.
Yeah.
Because that's their thing. So those secondaries give you those clues.
Yeah, they do. They really do.
The other thing I would mention, and Scott, you can chime in on this since you have more admissions expertise specific to med, where I have, some pre-college and pre-med. In the pre-college world, one of the things that we try to remind our students is, even if you got friends or siblings who got in a year or two before, AdComs are made up of humans and the members change year to year.
Yeah.
So you might know the mission and the vision of the school and their school values, but it's not like those are just like robots. I mean, if it were, we wouldn't need people on admissions committees. We would just do it electronic. So what they're looking for could change year to year, person to person. And I know I really respect why this person is asking. I'm not trying to like shame the question, but we want certain answers, even if the answer that is certain is sort of bad news, because we would almost rather just like know, right? But the truth is there is uncertainty and we just have to live with that. Yeah. So you're not going to be given a checklist that this makes you a fit for UT Southwestern or it doesn't, because I mean, that would almost feel better. Like it would be a bummer if you were given a list and you didn't fit, but at least you could stop worrying about it. Right. But instead you just have to live with the uncertainty. But yeah, secondary essays are one way to clue yourself in a little.
Absolutely.
All right, let's see what else we've got. Okay, talking budget here. I'm on a budget and I don't know if I'm ready to apply. By June of next year, I'll have about 200 hours of clinical exposure and 1,500 hours of research, almost all of that dedicated to one research. I graduated in May with a 3.8 GPA, 2 majors, chem and math. I'm currently doing a master's in biomaterials and I want to get an MD PhD. Well, sounds like we should have you on Am I Ready so we can really get into this.
Exactly. Exactly.
This person who wrote this big long comment didn't actually ask a question. I guess the question is, am I ready to apply?
Yeah. Because he said, I don't know if I'm ready to apply, particularly if he's applying to MD PhD, he or she's applying to MD PhD programs. Then, I think the MD PhD programs look much differently at applicants than just the strict MD program admissions committees. And every school kind of does their own thing in terms of how they do MD PhD admissions or dual degree admissions things. And so I think
the person just sent a follow-up. They're asking if they should take a gap year and accumulate more experience.
I think I would, I don't know. It depends a little bit. Like I've said this before in terms of MD PhD programs, what they are looking for specifically is not necessarily what you've done. I mean, that's important, but they're looking for, do you understand what you have been involved in? In other words, the research that you're doing, do you get it? Do you really understand any of it? And I know that sounds pretty superficial, but I think that MD, PhD programs are really looking for students who are going to be able to do well in their program, but who are going to be able to become independent investigators in a laboratory setting. And in order to become a primary investigator, you've really got to understand what's going on in that lab.
Right.
And not every student gets to that point. And so it's a little difficult to answer this question without knowing more about the specific circumstances. But what I would encourage the student to do is seek out some assistance and advice from a MD, PhD program. Hopefully there's one near you where you could kind of ask some questions of their program and find out what they think in terms of your experience and stuff like that. But it's a little difficult in this setting to analyze it a little bit.
I agree. Carefully. And we are going to do more and more Am I Ready? So for the student asking, if you're interested, you can always apply to that, or maybe you have and you're waiting for us to follow up. Right. I've got some students to respond to. But yeah, in GMAT test prep, we talk about data sufficiency problems. So there's like math problems you solve, and then there's also math problems where they just give you a bunch of data and then say, did I give you enough data to solve this problem? And I think with this question, we have insufficient data to solve the problem.
Exactly.
Exactly. But yeah, to Dr. Scott's point, a lot of it is going to be not your what, but your so what. So reflect on that research. Yeah. You know, if we were at a socially distanced cocktail party with our masks on and 6 feet of distance, and I said, hey, tell me what you do in the lab all day, and I knew nothing about science, could you explain it to me? That'd be a good start.
Yeah.
All right. Move on to a question about school lists.
Yeah.
Okay. When building a school list, how would you recommend determining if problem-based learning is a learning style you'd be comfortable doing? PBL is very different from traditional undergrad work, and therefore I'm not sure if it would work for me. But I guess I've never even tried it before.
Yeah. Well, PBL is very common these days in medical curricula. It's, essentially it's small group learning where you're in a group and you're given a problem. It can also be, a deviation of this is case-based learning where you're given a case and you have to sort of analyze the case and what are all the issues involved in the case and different members of the. So what I would say relative to the question is you really have to analyze how you learn. And if you learn better in a classroom setting, listening to a lecture, which is still, there are still lectures in medical school, and often they're streamed, and so you don't even have to be in the room. You'll be able to watch it online or to stream it when you're on the treadmill or whatever. I've seen that often. So you have to analyze what works for you in terms of learning. Do you learn better independently? Do you learn better with a group of people? Do you learn better in a classroom setting? Do you learn better from reading the textbook instead of listening to lecture? Or do you even read the textbook and you prefer to listen to lecture? I mean, you have to understand that whatever you do well in undergrad, you're going to have to figure it out all over again in medical school, because what worked in undergrad may not work in medical school for you. Right. And so I would say you have to kind of learn a little bit about looking at the curricula at the medical schools, but I wouldn't be afraid of problem-based learning. I think there's a lot of good parts of it, particularly if you're the kind of person who likes to involve yourself with other students in a small group setting and work together and go to study groups and stuff like that. I think, that's a lot of what problem-based learning is that kind of small group experience. So I would look at that and not be afraid of it.
Yeah, it's a good point. And something I've seen, this is all purely anecdotal, but just, I follow on social media a lot of students who are in med school. And something I hear a lot of them say is, I have to change my study skills depending on the term.
Yep.
Right. So even if, you get to med school and you think, oh my gosh, this is amazing, I figured it out. It might be that you figured it out for gross anatomy, and then you get to cardio and it's something completely different.
Yep.
So staying nimble and being open to learning lots of different ways is going to serve you really well, I think.
Absolutely.
All right. So student says, I scribe for a practice where I spend my time rounding with 2 physicians as a 50-50 split. That's good. Good work. I plan to ask for a letter of recommendation next year, and I wanted to know if there were any differences that will be seen by an AdCom to have a letter co-written by both, or if I should just ask one of them for a letter. All right, so she works with 2 doctors. So she asks them to team write a letter, or just ask one to write a letter? Or maybe
I think it'd be great if they would co-write the letter together. I think, that would be awesome if you're doing the scribe service on a 50-50 split, so that you're doing it kind of half with one and half with the other. And if they're willing to write you a letter co-written by the 2 of them, that sounds wonderful to me. It would have a lot of power in that it's coming from 2 different physicians that you've worked with. They obviously are going to be able to say a lot about you because they've worked directly with you over a long period of time. And so I would say ask them and see what they're willing to do. Just be honest with them. I'd like to have a letter. I don't want to have to choose one or the other of you. Would you guys be willing to do a co-written letter from the 2 of you?
Yep.
And I think that would be great.
Score.
Yeah.
That's a good problem to have, let me tell you.
Yeah, it is. Wow. For sure.
Too many choices. All right. You mentioned earlier holding off on asking a letter writer too early. Yes, we did. The student says, I asked a professor for a letter this past summer, won't be applying until next cycle. The professor already asked me for the information to write the letter. It surprised me a bit. I have not yet updated my personal statement. I'll be a reapplicant. Do you recommend trying to revise my personal statement and send the information anyways, or just keeping in touch with the professor? And then your question gets cut off because it was kind of long, but I think we're getting the gist.
Yeah.
So you've already gotten a yes, but the student's been told to send some stuff to follow up on that yes.
I would just go back to the professor and say, hey, I sort of jumped the gun, and I probably need to wait until after the first of the year to get the letter. And we're not talking about a huge amount of time between now and January. And right. And so I would probably just go back to him and say, hey, I'm working on my personal statement, adjusting it a little bit. I'm also wanting to make sure everything goes smoothly this cycle. So I'd like to wait until January before I get this information to you. Is that okay? Mm-hmm. And then, they should be all right with that, you would think. So,
yep.
Yeah.
All right. So sorry if this is a silly question. Oh, no, that's what we're here for. Ask away.
That's right.
I went to a community college for 3 years, and then I transferred to a university for 2 years. Is my last year at community college counted as sophomore, junior year? And is this, okay. So like class standing when you're at multiple schools for 5 years.
Right.
So I know how AMCAS handles this, but I don't know if Sauce, Texas, does it the same.
Yeah, I mean, basically what TMD SAS does is it's up to you to make that determination. You indicate they want to know for each class, were you a freshman, sophomore, junior, or senior when you took that class, or were you a post-bacc or whatever, and you just make that call. And so, traditionally, what traditionally is considered freshman is up to 30 hours, 30 to 60 hours is a sophomore, 60 to 90 is a junior, and then anything above 90 is a senior. that's sort of the traditional way to kind of deal with it in terms of the credit hours and stuff. And so, and so I was on the 5-year plan too. So hooray for 5-year people. And I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do and at the time, and I was pretty immature too. So it took me a while to figure things out. That sort of assumes I still have stuff figured out, but sometimes I don't. But anyway, that's a whole nother topic about my psychosis and stuff. So anyway, what I would say is, you're just going to make that call for each class, and you'll say, I took this as a freshman or a sophomore, or whatever. Now, what I would say about community colleges is typically community colleges only have up through the sophomore level of classes. So even though you spent 3 years at the community college, you were really only taking, unless it's a community college, there are some community colleges that through a variety of ways offer bachelor's degrees because of connections with senior institutions, et cetera. But you could indicate freshman, sophomore on those community college hours, and then junior, senior on your university hours. That's another possibility.
Yeah. MCAS is pretty similar. They have slightly they have ranges. So they'll say your freshman is 0 to 30, and then your sophomore is 30 to 60 or 65. They do some sort of windows. Yeah. But then the fine print says you can make some determinations. I know with AMCAS, the big thing is don't go back. So if you really feel like you ended up taking junior level courses by your 3rd year at community college, then it's still junior or maybe senior for your transfer university. Right. And that does mean that some students have disproportionately large senior years.
Yes, absolutely.
That go on for many, many credits. Yeah. And that's just part of the way the application unfolds. That's
right. Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right.
All right.
And that was not a silly question at all.
Not at all. No. Student says, I had trouble finding a job due to COVID. Yep. I was able to get a job as a medical scribe for an FNP. I've been there some months. Would it be helpful to my application to get a letter of rec from the FNP? Should I look for a position working under physicians instead?
That's a good question. Let me see what I would think about that.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, I would say not necessarily. So the question is, should I look for a position working under physicians instead? No, you're in a clinical setting. You're working with a mid-level clinical provider, a family nurse practitioner, and you're really, I think you're getting a lot of good experiences, or I'm assuming that you're getting a lot of good experiences in that practice. And it's like we've said consistently, you have found something that a lot of people would die for in terms of getting a job in a clinical setting like this. I don't think you should look for anything else right now. Just keep moving forward with it. It would be a good idea for you to do some physician shadowing if you can, right, or some volunteer type work with physicians themselves. But this is very good clinical experience, and so I wouldn't be afraid to keep it. And I also wouldn't be afraid to get a letter of recommendation from the nurse practitioner. I think that would be fine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I was just thinking, is if you were trying to make this shadowing only, because I know some scribe jobs are really behind the scenes where there aren't patient interaction, right? It's still good experience no matter what. But if the focus was on shadowing, nurse practitioner, it's not the same job. Right. But similar. But yeah, if you're talking about patient interaction, it's a great job.
Yeah, I agree completely.
Oh, someone's doing a follow-up to our 5-year plan question. They write piggyback, which is very helpful. I think I'm understanding your answer. If you've been an undergrad since 2005 with nearly 200 hours, are you just a senior for years and years?
Yep.
Yes, that's what we were saying.
That's absolutely correct.
It happens. Yep. Sometimes you also get longish freshman years because some people will call pre-high school freshman, although there is a pre-high school designation.
Yeah.
But senior is the one that tends to go real long just because, not everybody finishes up in 8 nice, neat semesters.
Or, if you change your major and that propels you into other classes that you've got to take, there could be a lot of circumstances that dictate why there'd be a lot of senior level hours. So, yeah. Sure. But I think you have a good understanding. The questioner does. Yeah.
We probably got time for 1 or 2 more. I'll see if some popcorn is popping here.
Oh, I love popcorn.
In my mind, the questions are always popcorn kernels, right? It's slow at the beginning while people are logging on and formulating their thoughts. Right. And then you get the big frantic pop. And then you start to get those 3 or 4 seconds between pops. I should probably turn the burner off, but it's not quite done popping.
Yeah. Now you're old school. If you're talking about burners for popcorn.
Oh yeah.
I'm talking about microwave.
I always do popcorn on the stove.
Oh,
microwave
really?
popcorn is not nearly as good as
stove.
Oh,
it's not. Popcorn. You're exactly right. It's not as good.
All right. Where can you stand out in a non-traditional way on your application? We know GPA and MCAT scores are important, but what areas really make an application stand out?
Well, this is, I talk a lot about, and this is, certainly important for non-traditional students, but also important for traditional students. It's the so what part. That's how your application stands out. It's not about what you did. Everybody's done things. The what part is going to be on there. The thing that differentiates, in my view, a good applicant from a great applicant is the so what part. Do you really talk about in your application what you got out of these experiences, the value of these things, how they were meaningful to you? That is where it really makes a difference. And that's the way you can differentiate your application from others, is really diving deeply into why was this meaningful to you? What did you learn out of these experiences? And the deeper you can get into that kind of stuff in your application, the better off you're going to be. And the deeper the admissions committee is going to really look at it with keen eyes and ears. Yep. So I'm definitely going to print up T-shirts that say, so what?
Yep. I was just looking to see, I'm like, do I already have a banner made that says it's not the what, it's the so what?
Yeah.
No, I got to make one of those banners.
Yeah, right.
We're just going to have it scrolling across the screen the whole time.
Yep.
Yeah, it's funny because I think we just got a similar question that might have, what's actually a different question that might have a similar answer. Feeling very stressed, realizing my GPA, cumulative, and post-bacc are lower than what I thought. I'm sorry you're feeling stressed. I did a 30-credit post-bacc DIY. I'm prepping for the MCAT tips.
Wow. So this is another kind of am I ready sort of question. Mm-hmm. I definitely think that if your cumulative GPA is, and the questioner doesn't really tell us what low means. Mm-hmm. Are you talking about a 3.6? Or are you talking about a 3.4? Or are you talking about a 2.5? There's really not enough information here to
we're not saying you have to post that. We're just saying.
Yeah, I'm just saying there's not a whole lot to go on here. But if you're post-bacc, what concerns me about this question is when you say post-bacc is lower. Mm-hmm. That's a concern for me, because what that says is the GPA was low originally. They've gone into a do-it-yourself post-bacc program, and it's not as high as they thought it was going to be. And so I would say this is a little bit of a concern. But I would say this is the kind of question that would be good for an Am I Ready episode. And but also this is a good question. MAPT, we offer services on advising, and this is a very good kind of thing where a student might be interested in doing a one-shot advising call with me to really talk deeply about the circumstances here.
Yeah.
So I think we have an update, but I don't think it's probably appropriate to.
Yeah, we don't want to. I appreciate this person sharing a little more data, but we don't want to, like. Well, I guess you're anonymous, but still.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
it sounds like you did have an upward trend. It just didn't really affect your cum that much. So yeah, there could be some more in depth here.
Yeah.
You asked for tips. To your point, your MCAT's not done yet. My tip would be, you've now had two different scholastic experiences where your result wasn't as high as you wanted. I think you need to reflect on that, right? So sometimes when that happens, people will tell me, well, I don't think it really reflects my ability because of XYZ circumstances. And I'm not saying XYZ to like be dismissive, because it could be a lot of things, right? It might be I had a crazy long commute to and from school, or it might be my grandma was sick and my mom works all the time, so it's really my job to take care of grandma, right? Like all things that are valid. But then my question is, where are you with those circumstances now? Are you signed up for an in-person MCAT class and it's also a long commute? Or are you going to try to take an online MCAT class while you're at home, also taking care of this sick relative? Like, you need to think about those circumstances, because and a higher MCAT isn't a magical cure, but it might help offset some of the GPA.
Yeah.
But you've just got out of a period where you weren't quite getting the results you wanted. So what can you do this time to really turn that around? And sometimes that means giving yourself some really tough love.
Right.
And sometimes it means having conversations with family who don't get it, that don't want you to study somewhere else. I mean, it's really hard to study somewhere else right now, but they think you should be home studying, but then you're getting interrupted by the TV or the toddler or whatever. Like, you may have to think really hard about how you're going to change your game plan. So that would be my tip, is it's definitely not time to give up hope. It is time to assess yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And just, I mentioned the advising services, and just to be clear, we do offer advising services through map.com. One of the top links is for services, and you can see everything that we do in terms of editing for personal statements, or one-on-one advising, application advising for the entire cycle. So there's a variety of things on there that you can look at and hopefully find something that fits your needs.
All right. Good. Okay. Our question says they look forward to updating us with their MCAT results.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, that'd be great.
All right. We'll take one more here and we'll probably wrap up for the evening. I'm currently a firefighter looking to apply next year for medical school. I'm non-traditional. I've been an EMT and then a paramedic and then now a firefighter all over the last 13 years. My grades in the past have not been good, but now I'm doing a post-bacc. My sciences GPA will be a 3.01 with an upward trend of A's and B's. Do you think I need a graduate program?
Well, again, this is a little bit, I think that's good. If there's been an upward trend, that's a good thing. I think, obviously I think medical schools tend to like non-traditional students and students that have a background, particularly like this student with this is a very high intensity career that you're in. This is, whether you're EMT, paramedic, firefighter. I think these days most firefighters have to be EMTs anyway, and even a lot of them even paramedics. And so I think that there's a lot of good stuff there, and it would depend a little bit, I think, on what that post-bacc GPA was. That you talked about doing post-bacc stuff. And I know the cum is probably always going to be low, but we want to look at that trend, and we want to look specifically at that post-bacc GPA to see this is much more close to who you are now in the classroom than it was 13 years ago when you were a 18-year-old straight out of high school. So so I would say definitely this is a good start, and you seemingly got a lot of good stuff, but depends a little bit on some of the questions that we really don't know the information. So
Yeah.
again, we're a little bit unable to kind of get too deeply into an answer that might be satisfying.